So welcome everybody, to those of you who are present live and those of you watching in the recording. So this is the fifth of our 9 webinars, so exactly halfway in terms of the number of webinars. But today, I'm basically it's the purpose of today is mostly to give feedback on question trees that were submitted for review. There will be extremely limited new content, and it's more like bonus content rather than essential content. So it's mostly focused on feedback. So let me just quickly walk you through the agenda. So we're going to quickly recap what question trees are all about. I think it should be familiar by now, but I think still I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Then I'll give feedback on the question trees received. So I received 2, so I'll give feedback on those. And then I included 2 question trees from earlier cohorts that I'm also going to give feedback on. This way you have a couple more, let's say, data points about feedback. And then I will share with you a couple of thinking hacks that can help to get unstuck when you're trying to build your structures. And they're also just generally like neat little thinking hacks, but nothing huge. And then we'll kind of close this phase 2. This is the third webinar we're spending on phase 2, so we're going to close it. And then we'll talk about next steps. Good. So let me recap quickly the question trees. So I guess if we start kind of at the beginning, right? We have our project. We've defined our project. At the core of the project definition is the definition of the problem itself, which we frame as a question about what to do. And now what we want to do is basically figure out a plan of attack. How are we going to tackle the answering of this question? How are we going to proceed? And so what we've been talking about is basically building an analytical roadmap for this. So a roadmap that consists of actually analytically breaking down the question. And so here we have the example of the case question that we've been using since the very beginning. How can help desk restore the profits? And we have the analytical breakdown. And what makes this really good as a breakdown are those exact same things that we want to sort of test it for. So essentially 3 things. The first is that it's solution focused. So in other words, the questions that are on the right-hand side are such that when we answer them, it gives us a partial solution to the overall problem. So that makes the whole question tree very efficient. If we manage to break down our question tree in the form of questions that lead to answers, like directly lead to answers, that's super efficient, as opposed to questions that lead to mounds of data. Yeah. Second bit is MISI. So mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. So there's 2 benefits from this. The mutually exclusive, no overlaps, means that like we're avoiding confusion. Everything is clear. It's cut cleanly, right? And the collectively exhaustive, essentially one way to think about it is that when we're answering all those questions that we have on the right, we're kind of like we're covering the whole problem. Not just a part of the problem, but the whole problem. So we're being exhaustive, which is great. That's exactly what we want. And finally, it fits with the context. So essentially what we want is we want the breakdown that we have to make business sense. We don't want to break it down into something which is, like, let's say technically right, but doesn't make business sense, right? And so the best way to ensure that it makes business sense is if it fits the context. Yes, Anton.
So I basically have 2 questions. Maybe it was discussed previously, but I wanted to double check. So the thing is that we need to do it from bottom to top, basically, yes?
What do you mean by bottom to top?
So like from simpler questions, we are raising like to the main question. No? So
Uh,
how, like basically how you split the questions into those, simpler ones. So you have the bigger question,
yeah,
like
how to restore profits. Yeah.
yes, and then you split them into like simpler questions and then for like even more simpler questions, and so you answer like from bottom to top. Yes.
Yeah, so they're indeed. I wouldn't necessarily say they're simpler, but definitely more granular, like a smaller scope. Yeah, and then we answer.
And the second and
And
the
then,
second question,
yeah.
so why no data questions? Because they like
So the thing is, if you break down your roadmap into data questions, all you get is data by definition. So
well, whether we're not interpreting data to answer like the question, for example, regarding the revenue.
yeah,
Like,
but there's a difference between saying in this as part of this project we want to figure out how to increase revenue
yeah.
versus saying we need to figure out what how is the revenue structured.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I just say how is the revenue structured, I'll find the data, I will find the structure, and now what?
So there's a question how we can how we can restructure revenue so the company might be like more efficient, let's say.
Exactly. But so that's why you want to phrase the questions in such a way that they produce solutions rather than in a way that they produce data. So if we say how can we increase revenue, if we assume that we get a good answer to this, that will be solutions,
Mm-hmm. So
right?
basically, data itself is not a solution. It's just
No, data is not
something that needs interpretation.
exactly.
Okay.
Data in itself is not a solution. You're right. Data in itself is
I thought that maybe like data could be like one of the questions that then needs to be interpreted in the right way. So it's part of the way, no?
yeah, but then I would say like figure out the interpretation up front. So figure out up front how you're going to want to interpret whatever data you end up getting later. We will need data later, there's no question. We'll
Mm-hmm.
we'll need data to answer these questions.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
these are the questions that need to be solved to solve the problem. And that's what we want to figure out is we need to figure out what are the questions we need to solve in order to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Not simply what are the questions that are going to produce data.
Well, I have problems with this basically. Okay.
Yeah, the thing is if you just create a roadmap that that produces data and you don't know what you're going to want to do with that data, then you've just created a situation where you're just going to collect a lot of data and most likely 80-90% of it will not be useful. So that's not helpful.
Yeah, I think I already asked this question, and it's really counterintuitive, Anton. I agree. The point is that we define a plan, we define a structure, and only then we do the necessary analysis. For
Correct.
me, it's also like, yeah, just try to understand the problem, figure out some numbers and data, and then try to find the solution. No, I think here we first define the structure, and when the structure is there, we do the only hunting for the right data and not just any data that might seem relevant.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly
It
right.
it's like literally very counterintuitive because it's the way what we do on the data analytics course is that we have data and then we have interpretation. But when I thought about this tree, I thought that's one of the questions basically can be also like data itself, and then you interpret it. So you answer the questions based on it.
Yeah, but the thing is, I don't know exactly how what happens in your data analytics course, but I'm pretty sure that your faculty would always be telling you like before you start gathering data, is like know what you want to do with that data.
Yes, yeah, well, like you always have a brief. Why do you want to why you're just gathering this data? But
Exactly.
But this is the data question. Actually, what kind of data you want to get and what are you going to do with it? So that's why I was asking why like no data question.
But before you know what data you want to get, you need to know what you want to solve with it.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the questions that you want to solve.
Okay.
The next step, it's actually 2 steps later, but let's say the question of what data should we get comes after figuring this out. Okay, because in order to figure these questions out, what we're going to do is we're going to basically break it down into we're going to try to figure out the analyses that we want to do. And the analyses that we want to do will determine the kind of data that we need. Yeah. So basically the data becomes really the servant in service of the master. And the master is the question or are the questions that need to be solved, that need to be answered. And you got to be very careful about not flipping the order, not flipping the hierarchy here. If the data becomes the master, and the data drives the questions that we answer, we have a problem because then there's a risk that we answer a whole bunch of questions that are not helpful and that we don't answer the questions that we need to answer.
I need to think about it because my project is basically about pricing, and it's very tightly connected to data and how
Yeah, of
to.
course. But what's the question in your project? What's the overarching question?
So the overall question is how to bundle the products perfectly, and how different products are gonna bundle and what would be like the potential discount, long term, short term. So it's
Let's say what kinds of what product bundles to offer to customers, right?
yeah, and
Okay, good,
how
good.
to and
So
how they affect like fixed cost variable
that's right. Okay, fine, fine. But so the question is, so one way to think about this, I don't have the whole picture on your project, etc., right? But one of the reasons that you would want to create bundles is to basically serve different segments better. So you're going to create a bundle to basically fit the needs of a particular segment.
Yes.
Okay, so the first question, so one question that you would want to put in your approach here is not a data question. It would be, what are the segments that we want to serve? A second question might be, what are the needs, or what do these segments value? What's important to them? What are their needs? Third might be, how can we bundle for each of these segments? How can we bundle our products so as to meet their needs? And then the fourth would be, so what are the pricing implications? You see, but so all these questions that I just gave, they're questions that are part of the solution. They're not questions that just produce data. They drive the data that is needed.
Yes, so this is
The
like
questions drive the data. The questions are the masters, the data is the servant.
Which is again a bit counterintuitive, as also Anton mentioned. So we know data-driven, being data-driven is good. We are trying to be data-driven in all what we do. But again, this will still come as I interpret it. Again, I trust Nicolas here, not that I'm there yet. But yes, I think the data-drivenness will come because in order to answer the questions, we will analyze the data.
I mean, now that you mention it, just now that you mention it, this word data-driven, I can see how, yeah, maybe that's maybe not quite the right word. It should be like, we should be data-based, but not driven, as in, so not in the sense that like we want the data to just the data drives us, right? It should be the thinking that drives us and the data that like feeds that feeds the analysis, but not that determines not that
Yeah, but
defines
this
the
is
analysis.
exactly what we were told on the advanced data analytics course, that you should basically use data and interpret it like in the right way. So it's not just numbers, It's the way how we interpret them. Okay.
No, that's right. But before that, so I think there's no disagreement there. I think the question is, who comes first? Like, do you first sort of just collect a whole bunch of data and then figure out what does that data say? Or do you first figure out what do we want to find out and then ask what data do we need to figure this to find this out?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the order of the logic, the master and the servant.
And I think the antonym of the data driven in IT would be speculative, I think, something like this. So when you don't analyze the data, but just have some idea and try to put it, it's not in contradiction here, I think. But again, in IT, it's why is it considered that data driven is better than just, yeah, I know this is my solution, just apply to it. No, when we analyze the data, it gives us a better understanding of the problem, and then we solve it.
Yeah, but so I think the contrast that you just described between sort of, let's say, data and no data is not the contrast that we've been talking about or that I'm talking about. So
because we're trying to bring the structure here,
yeah.
and then after the structure, we'll analyze the data. This
Exactly.
is what I try to convince myself that it works. Not that I'm fully convinced, but yeah, that's what I take for now.
Exactly.
If I may comment on it, Arsen,
Yeah.
I think also it's not only about, setting up the structure first and then analyzing the data, but setting up the structure first to understand what kind of data you need,
Exactly.
and then collect that data, and then basically hope that it supports your hypothesis.
Exactly. Here, let me just to illustrate with a really, really super example. Let's just say that, like, for one reason or another, we've just decided, like, the problem you need to fix is how can I double my salary in the next 6 months? Okay? So you have two options. You can try to negotiate a better salary within your current job, or you can try to get a different job. Yeah? Well, so hold on. See, I already started to put some structure on it. But suppose I hadn't put some structure on it. The person who just starts to go get data, they might just start collecting the data, but all the jobs available out there, right? But if you put some structure on and the thing is, you're going to collect a whole bunch of data that is totally useless, because all the data you collect about being a rocket scientist and about janitorial services and blah, blah, blah is just going to be completely and utterly useless, right? You don't need that data. So, but if you structure the problem up front and you say, okay, so I can either, how can I negotiate better salary within my current job, or how can I find a different job? And then you break down the how can I find a better job into, let's say, into job categories that fit your different parts of your skill set. So, for example, how can I find, maybe you're a finance person, right? So you say, how can I find better paying, I don't know, banking jobs? How can I find better paying PE jobs? How can I find better paying, I don't know, CFO type job? Yeah. Okay. Now we have something a little bit more, we have something much more structured. And we know we have a better sense of the kind of data that we're going to need. So that's why figuring out the structure of the problem up front is going to guide the kind of data we're going to look for. But if we just say, what are the jobs available out there that pay more, that pay at least twice as much as what I earn today, we're just going to get a whole bunch of data that is just not useful. So hopefully that helps. Good. Good. All right. So let's move on to the feedback. So there were two submissions. So again, what I'm gonna give feedback on is, one is kind of the clarity. Do I understand things? And then does the question tree actually make, like, is it robust? So basically, does it pass the three tests that we were just describing? So anyway, and you should continue to refine them, whether you are people who submitted here or not. Get feedback from peers. I actually think asking ChatGPT for feedback on your question trees is really good. As long as you provide ChatGPT with the enough context about your problem, and you give ChatGPT kind of like the rules about what you want feedback on. So basically the health check. So you want your question to be solution focused, MECE, and to make business sense. So give that as the rules, and then it'll give you. I mean, generally it gives excellent feedback. And then of course work with your sponsor, right, to continue to refine them, because at the end of the day, it needs to resonate with your sponsor. So I suggest so for you to get the people who are present here to get the benefit from this, I suggest read the question tree. So I suggest start with the question. If you feel like you need more context, then scan or read the situation complication, and then read level 1 of the question tree, and then scan level 2. But I think it's important to get the whole view on level 1 before starting to look at the detail of level 2. And then just tell me when you're done. So by the way, the 2 question trees that show up are the same as, I mean, not the same, but they're evolutions from the same 2 that we looked at last week or last time. So let me know when let me know in the chat box when you're done reading this one. Okay, thank you, Eric. Okay, so I don't think that there's been a lot of evolution from the submission, the previous submission. I think overall, so there's a number of things that work, and I'm not going to repeat the things that work because I already mentioned them last time. But I think overall, let's say it's still overall it's too vague. This is too vague actually to be workable and to lead to the kinds of results that you're really looking for. I think the question itself is very clear, but what precedes the question and what comes after the question is too vague, and it's too. I think it could be made more robust. So on the SCQ, I think just one small thing is I actually think the last bullet of the situation is part of the complication. But then all the stuff in the complication is not really coherent. It lists a lot of facts that don't actually work really well together. And so I think that just requires a little bit more thinking about what's really at stake here, what are really the issues, and just make sure that that this is just presented in a robust manner. Now, as for the question tree, if I focus on level one, so I think first of all, the framing of the two questions in level one are both vague. How can we build relationship with TA? So TA, I assume that means the target audience, so Gen Z. Build relationship is a little bit vague. What does that mean, right? So there might be I would suggest to rewrite it in a more precise way. Maybe something like, how can we strengthen the ongoing engagement and strengthen brand affinity with Gen Z? That already is more specific. Yeah. Same thing for the second question, the one at the bottom. How can we spur desire to purchase product? I think it could be made more precise. Maybe something like, how can we increase their motivation to choose Samsung when purchasing a phone? Already, that would be much more specific, right? So that's one aspect, is just making things at the level one more specific, less vague, because vagueness is really it's one of our number one enemies in this whole final reports is vagueness, because vagueness means, it's like you're walking blind or half blind in a jungle that's already dense with fog and challenges. So if you can't see where you're going, it's hard. Now the other thing about level one is, I think it's incomplete. I think there's a couple of things that are missing for me, um, in order to get to the part where you actually manage to increase market share. So even if you solve the how to improve the relationship with them and how to get them to, let's say, how to increase their motivation to choose a Samsung over other things when buying a phone, there's still a couple things that you would need to solve, right, to ultimately get your market share improvement. So one of them would be, you would want to think about how to make sure that they actually have the right kind of access to Samsung products and that they have the opportunity to actually experience them, right? It's one thing to be like, oh yeah, I want them, but or it looks cool. For example, through advertising, oh yeah, these Samsung products look really cool. So my motivation now to get a Samsung has increased. But if I can't find them, if I can't get my hands on them, if I can sort of like test them, with my hands, with a little bit of experience, seeing how easy they are to handle and stuff like this, then that's a big part of the equation that's missing. And then I think the second big part that's missing is, you have to think, how do you get people to actually switch brands, right? So how do you get them to switch from whatever brand they're currently with to Samsung? Because there's always some kind of a switching cost, when you are changing from one product to another. And so these are the kinds of things that you would want to. It's not enough to want a Samsung. It's kind of like, yeah, I want to live in Barcelona. I do. But the cost of leaving Amsterdam, where I live now, is high. It's actually too high. So I'm not going to move to Amsterdam to Barcelona. Does that make sense? So it's not enough to want a Samsung. You got to get over your current thing. So I would say that should be covered in the level one. So, but again, there's many other ways of hacking at this question, many other ways of like structuring this level one. You could think about it, from the perspective of like, let's say I'm going to show you, right, a couple of examples, but you could like approach it by funnel, like following the funnel of like the journey of the customer, right? So how to increase the awareness, how to increase consideration, etc. That's the classic marketing funnel. That's another way to look at it, where basically you're trying to figure out where in the journey can we intervene and really make a difference such that they actually ultimately go with us rather than somebody else. You could look at it more from in terms of growth levers. So how to acquire like the Gen Z customers who currently buy other brands, how to retain the ones who are already with us and prevent churn, how to increase the frequency of upgrades, within the people that we already have, and so on. So this is just another way. It's actually a bit more of a mathematical way of thinking about it. You could think about it along the classic 4 Ps of marketing, right? Or you could think about it in terms of like, how do you compete with your competitors? So outperforming them on brand image, outmatching them on product features, outmatching them or outperforming them in terms of the channels, the social media channels, and how you engage with Gen Z, and so on. So there's a number of different sort of angles of attack of this problem. So the one that you have is one. That's one angle of attack, but it's incomplete, as I suggested. But there's other angles of attack that you could consider. And what I would say, and Eric, I will give you the floor in just 30 seconds. The angle of attack that you choose should be motivated by the way that or ideally should be motivated by how you frame the complication. Like, so basically, if in the complication you kind of say like, let's say if you believe that fundamentally the issue is how we engage with this generation, it's not about the product, it's not about the features, etc. It's about how we engage with it. Then put that focus on the complication, and then choose a frame to break down the problem that reflects that. If you think it's more simply just that, like, I don't know, it kind of covers a whole gamut. So everything about marketing we don't do right, then put that in the complication framing and reflect that in the way that you break down the question. Eric, yes.
Yeah, I still wanted to submit my question 3. I'm sorry I haven't been able to, but taking the advantage of having a similar discussion here, I would like to know if it, for example, would also apply to services, right? Like, for example, we have an engineering consultancy firm. We're active in Denmark with solar and wind energy, and we want to enter the German battery storage advisory market. I would assume that the thinking is more or less the same. So in principle, I was also missing on Omolades tree, the competition that you just highlighted. And I was also thinking that if you're to enter a neighboring geographical market with a new service where already available consultants are in that area, that you need to then think of, well, if it's switching if the market is saturated, but otherwise it could be that you still capture work not by switching, but by customers that simply are not served yet because the demand is so high. But generally, thinking of how to capture share from the competition is something that you need to or can include in that tree, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, it's maybe a bit of a complicated question, but I'm just seeing some parallels here.
So the thing is, I don't know enough about this market to know whether there's any kind of like loyalty, loyalty in the market that you describe. I really don't know. So if you think about, let's say, the top end management consulting, so not engineering consulting, but management consulting, top end, right? So the clients who hire McKinsey, BCG, etc. There's a high degree of loyalty until they decide not to be loyal anymore. But there's a high degree of loyalty. So I don't know. It's like they're with McKinsey and they'll continue to hire McKinsey and McKinsey and McKinsey and McKinsey. And so there, indeed, there is a big question around how do we steal clients from our competition? Because that's where they are, right? It's not like there's new clients coming onto the market all the time. There aren't. So it's about gaining share from, right? So, but in your market, I don't know, there might not be issues of loyalty like that. So depending on how much loyalty matters is gonna have an impact on how much you put the notion of taking share from others at the forefront or not of your.
Okay. Yeah, I think the issue that we perceive is mainly language and let's say the federal setup of Germany, where everything is, people that live in Bavaria already know the Bavarian consultants and use the engineering that is local.
Yeah.
So I think that is a barrier to tackle. But
I mean, what you could consider, I actually think the funnel one might not be so bad
okay.
for your problem.
Hmm.
Because at the end of the day, I would say this, and then Anton, I'll be with you. But my sense is this, right? One of the challenges that you face entering the German market is that no one knows you.
Yes.
So it's not just a recognition problem, but it's a trustworthiness problem.
Hmm.
How can I trust you? Because I've never seen anything of you.
Yes.
And plus, you're not even German, right?
We're working
So,
on that, but yes.
no, but you know what I mean, right? So there's a big issue, and so if trust is a big sort of thing that needs to be solved,
Hmm.
and following the customer journey, where by definition, you stay really close to the customer,
Hmm.
and you try to solve the roadblocks that are in the customer's mind. That's, I think, the most this is how you can stay as close as possible to the problem of trust.
Okay. Thanks. No, that's good. Mhm.
Yes, Anton.
Yeah, I actually it's more or less similar question to Eric's because the company is also B2B, but I'm trying to think whether the question is whether it's possible to build brand loyalty in B2B will be very broad if we do it the first level and then split it into some more or less data connected questions, like with examples. For example, because you've mentioned the interesting question with McKinsey and BCG, I thought about it, and in my case, it's a very specific niche product like cybersecurity and everything like that. But the main question that is always discussed internally whether the brand loyalty and brand commitment really affects, for example, pricing model. So I thought maybe even to restructure the way how I approach it. Okay,
So,
with the funnel, it's clear. It's definitely clear. It's fine. But the question in here whether I can ask more general, more broad question whether it's possible to build a brand loyalty and whether it affects the price.
so my first reaction to your question, and I'm really not a branding expert, so I think you should talk to somebody who actually knows brand. But my first initial sort of instinctive reaction to your question is that like the notion of brand loyalty is far less meaningful and pertinent in B2B than in B2C.
Definitely.
You might have company loyalty, so loyalty to a certain supplier, but I don't think that it necessarily reflects a loyalty to the brand of that supplier.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? So again, I'll go back to what I know. Our client, when I was at McKinsey, our clients were very loyal to us, but I don't think it was because it was the McKinsey brand. I think it was simply because McKinsey for them, like it's how to put it, it went beyond McKinsey. It was kind of like for them working with McKinsey actually meant with working with these and these and these and these people whom they knew, whom they trusted, just like these individuals, right? They had a track record. These individuals and the teams that they put together had a track record of delivering consistently, reliably to the clients. So this is to me, this is not again, I'm not a brand person, but to me it doesn't feel like brand. When I think about brand, I feel the things that come more to my mind are things around identity, right? Um, so I don't know, it's kind of like I say whatever, like Audi is my car and not BMW because Audi, has these qualities, reflects these values, whereas BMW doesn't, kind of thing. So there's a lot of that identity in brand that I think matters far less in B2B type stuff. Again, I'm not an expert, so maybe I'm completely wrong, and a branding expert would just kind of destroy what I'm saying. But that's my sense. So that's something that comes to my mind. But I think the notion of being loyal to a supplier, loyalty like that, without putting the brand on, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then I think if you want to think about like how can we increase the let's say the loyalty of our suppliers to us or vice versa, then you can think about what are the drivers that contribute to loyalty. And so that, drivers ABC. And so then you can be like, okay, so how can we increase, A? How can we increase B? How can we increase C?
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other, so we kind of got distracted from this particular one, but I don't know if there's any other thoughts or reflections on this particular question tree. Okay. I would recommend the following. I think, like I said, like I was saying before, I think it can be really helpful to ask ChatGPT for feedback on your question tree. Really helpful. It's just like ChatGPT is a pretty smart team member when you converse with it the right way. Okay. Then let's go through the second one. So again, same thing. Read the question first. If you need context, read the situation complication, then read level 1, then scan level 2, and let me know when you're done. Okay. All right. So the SCQ is the same as last time. And so is the question. So I'm not going to repeat the feedback that I gave on the SCQ as last time. It's exactly the same. But except just to say, to me, there's a big disconnect between the question and the situation complication. They don't really speak together. So I think the question needs a different context. That being said, I do have definitely some feedback for the question tree, which itself has evolved. So I think so. Level one, I would actually say, I would actually simplify probably the first question to what customer segments or what customer segments should we target? Because that's going to be something that you try to solve in terms of a variety of criteria. And one of those criteria is likely to be the deal size. If you actually care about deal size, then you're probably going to have different deal sizes that possibly have different deal sizes that um, map to different customer segments. So I actually think that you could probably just simplify the question to what segments should we target. And then the second, I would link then the B1 to the A1. So in other words, what business model adjustments should we make to attract and serve our target segments more effectively? Right? So in other words, what segments, so A1, what segments do we want to go after? Because, you know, they are the segments that meet all these conditions. And B1 is basically, so how do we need to adjust our business model in order to attract and serve them effectively? And I would actually think that's it. The C1, I think is very vague. I'm really not sure what viable means. But when I look at the detail in C2, to me, what it looks like, again, I struggle to see the overall, the sort of the umbrella, the unifying thread in all these bullet points of C2. But overall, to me, what it seems like is that this is all stuff that is outside the scope of the question to solve. By and large, I think that the stuff that is in C2, C1, C2 is about something about profitability, something about long-term viability and all this kind of stuff, which technically is outside the scope of the question, which is simply saying, hey, how do we just get to this first threshold? So there's a disconnect there. If that connection needs to be made, it's probably in the situation and the complication, but as it is, it's a disconnect. Now A2, if A1 is simply which segments should we target, customer segments should we target, then basically A2 just becomes a question of what are the criteria that we should use to assess a segment's attractiveness and which segments best meet these criteria. I think it just becomes that simple. So in other words, the work, the intellectual work becomes is about basically figuring out what those criteria are. And the research work, so the data work, becomes about finding, you know, the data about the potential clients against our criteria, and then kind of analyzing to figure out what are the segments that are the most attractive. So anyway, that's how I would think of A2 really. What are the criteria that you know, basically according to what criteria do we define attractive, a segment's attractiveness, and then which segments best meet those criteria. And then B2, I think the stuff that is in there is probably right. So in other words, you're kind of wondering, right? The question is what adjustments to the business model do we need to do? And I think all the stuff that you have in there points to various aspects of the business model. I'm assuming that these are indeed probably the ones that are the most, let's say, the most at-risk aspects of the German business model that might need to be revised. So to me, it looks right. To me, B2 looks right. Any thoughts or questions, feedback from anybody?
Just a question. This big number of questions in the level 2, is it expected? Is it what we want to have? Because I assume each question then would need separate analysis and a lot of work. Do we want to have like 5, 6 questions in the second level or 20?
No. So five, like already 5 or 6 to me is already a red flag. It's a red flag. I mean, it's too much. Like normally it should be 2, 3, or 4. Really, like 3 is kind of like the sort of the most preferred number, but you need to do it. You need to do the breakdown in an intellectually robust
Yeah,
way.
3, 4 for each of the questions in level 1.
Yeah, exactly. 3, 4.
Mhm.
3, 4. Sometimes 2 does it. Sometimes you need to go to 5. But when it's 6 or 7, to me, it's a red flag that the thinking is not done properly. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I had one
Yes.
annotation from my side was that I had the impression that on A2 there were a couple, maybe 2 at least, questions that sounded like data mining, what you had highlighted, right? Like, how does expected churn or expansion revenue vary by segment? Then you know that it varies or how it varies, but then you generated a picture, but you still need to interpret it.
Yeah. So, okay. How do I answer this? All right. Let's take a step back. You remember that there are 3 types of questions.
Mhm.
We have the how-to questions, we have the system questions. Let's forget about the system questions for now. So we have the how-to questions and we have the options questions. Yeah.
Mhm.
How-to question is how to whatever increase profit, and an options question is, should we do this, yes or no, or which option should we choose? Fine. Now, if we take a how-to question, like we had, sorry, like our help desk thing, that's a how-to question, right? Then indeed, it's like the distinction between a data question and a solution-oriented or solution-focused question is very easy. How can we increase revenue versus, how is our revenue structured, or what are the sources of revenue? That distinction is very clear. And it's very clear that if we can answer how can we increase revenue in a good way that will give us useful solutions, and if we answer the other one, it'll just give us data, that is probably not useful. When we move to an options question, remember how we break down options questions. The way we think about options questions is in terms of criteria, right? So if I say, sorry, let me go back to the other one. So which segments should we target? It's an option question because I have a choice between all these segments, and then the question is which ones should I go for? So I'm going to think about it in terms of criteria. So my criteria could be the size of the segments, the growth of the segments, the average deal size in those segments, the I don't know, the level of maturity, HR maturity within those segments, blah, 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 right? We can come up with a whole bunch of criteria. So now that we know the criteria to assess those segments, what we need now is data. So it's actually not wrong here, because the thing is, when you say, where was the question? Like, which sectors show the fastest demand growth, for example. It's not just random data that you're asking for. You're asking data that connects directly to a criterion that you have determined to be important.
Okay. No, yeah, now that I understand that, of course, it's different once it becomes a subsection of a previous level question, then it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's a very good question. And indeed, it's an important nuance. I mean, it's a very big nuance, but so it's a very good question. Yeah.
Thanks.
Good. Other questions? Okay. Good. So what I did, I brought a couple of simpler question trees from earlier cohorts, just to give you guys a couple of extra data points. So, and they're kind of easier to wrap your head around. So I thought we could just go through the same exercise that we went with these two, just so that you have a couple more reference points. So read this one again. Start with the question, read the situation complication, look at level 1, scan level 2, and let me know when you're done. And then I'll sort of give feedback on this one. Okay. So I'll provide feedback on this one. So overall, this is actually very, very good. It's a very good SCQ and question tree. So the SCQ, I think the flow is very good. The logic is very good. The question is by and large quite clear. The only sort of like two potential improvements on this one is very small, is in the complication. One might, at the beginning of the fourth bullet point, add as a result, the motivation of key employees is falling. But okay, but that's a very small detail. And then there is a little bit of uncertainty within the question around what does maintain the same business model mean? So hopefully that is clarified on the PDT. But right now, as it is, it's a little bit unclear.
A small question here.
Yeah.
Do we know even, or we don't, but probably it is on some other slide, but we don't know the details of the business model at all, right?
No, not much. No. I mean, we
know only about high quality service and it's near home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then again, if you think about a fitness club, I mean, I guess without knowing, then probably you just make an assumption about, take the most common business model as an assumption. But indeed, these are some things that might need to be checked.
Okay.
So then the question tree, I think, so level 1, I think, is very good. So I think basically it's a question about finding sources of financing, right? So I think the level 1 is very good. There is potentially a fifth box to add in level 1, which is around some kind of a restructuring of existing debt, if there is some existing debt. But okay. I think the first box is so the breakdown of the first box, right? So reduce capex for new location. I think it's good stuff in there. It's very good, actually, all nice and clean and messy. Could potentially add a box around changing the format of the fitness clubs, unless that's not allowed because we need to keep the business model the same, right? So again, if you have a chain of fitness, maybe part of the business model is that like all your studios are, I don't know, like, 100 square meters, like 100 to 120 square meters. Maybe that's part of the business model. Um, but maybe it's not. Maybe your business model doesn't specify you, so you can have very small formats, bigger formats, and it doesn't matter. Like that's not part of the business model. So again, it depends. The question of using smaller formats, whether it's allowed or not, depends on whether maintaining it complies with maintaining the same business model. Um, so the second box, find cheap capital. It's a little bit unclear. So what's a little bit unclear is whether like capital here refers only to like debt type capital or if it also includes equity. And so it might make sense to kind of like break it down between that.
But we have find long-term investors, which I assume would be, but maybe it's my speculation. So I thought long-term investor will be against taking some equity, and the other two would be, well, yeah, from state it's a grant, and other are subsidy loans. But yeah, for me, long-term investment was a bit more like, again, like 2%, sell 2% to somebody and invest the money.
But it could also be debt, right? So this is why it could be a little bit of there could be more clarity in the question tree, right? But okay, I mean, like again, overall, it's a good question tree, right? It's just kind of like some fine tuning in terms of clarity. Third box could potentially add like tax optimization, okay, and then. Uh, And then the fourth box is kind of interesting, right? The developed by franchising model. So that one you kind of wonder, oh, but is that consistent with the business model? It feels like potentially a violation of the idea of maintaining the business model, right? Because going franchising is something totally different. But okay. Uh, that's so again, all this can be solved with enough detail in the PDT, enough clarification in the PDT. But overall, it's a good question tree, and it's nice and it's quite clean. It's nice. Any other thoughts on this one? Questions? Okay. And I'll show you one more. This was not an actual project. This was somebody who was actually doing the optional assignments. She did not have a project yet, but so she was deciding to do the assignments anyway in order to kind of like build her muscles. So she kind of created a sort of hypothetical problem. So I thought that was cool that she did that. Anyway, here, just so you know, the context is just assume that it's a company that operates a large fleet of trucks. Okay. And for whatever reason, they need to reduce the fleet costs. So I'll let you read the question tree and then let me know when you're done, and then I'll kind of comment on them.
I don't remember where is the raise hand.
Oh, it's okay.
May I? I hope folks are done. Reduce variable costs. So felt a bit off that variable costs are only fuel. The first thing that comes to my mind is the maintenance, continuous maintenance of the trucks. If we can reduce it or not, I don't know, but at least would make sense to have it.
Yeah, that's right. So you're totally right about that. That is something that's missing in the variable costs. Let me just make a couple of comments first, a little bit higher level. So if you compare in level one, the first box and the third, fixed costs and reduce admin costs and overhead costs, technically we have an overlap. So probably in fact, I know, I can tell that what the person meant was reduce fixed costs of the fleet, but it's still better to specify it because then you no longer have the overlap, right? Now, so if she does this, reduce fixed costs of the fleet and reduce variable costs and reduce admin and overhead costs, that's perfect. That's very, very good. Only one issue is that fixed costs and variable costs in practice, it's a very difficult distinction to make in practice, unless you have a very, very clear horizon. And somehow the context of the problem makes it very easy to kind of say this is fixed, this is variable. But in the long run, all costs are variable in the long run, in the very long run, right? So where you draw the distinction between fixed and variable does become a question of is a little bit arbitrary, and it depends on the horizon you choose to work with. So this is why I'm always a little bit uneasy with this kind of breakdown. It's not wrong, but it's just it makes things sometimes a little bit difficult. Anyway,
having some timeline in the very first question would help with that, right? So if we are planning to do, I don't know, reducing the fleet costs in the next 6 months, that would probably help us really distinguish that this is fixed cost in the 6 months perspective and this is variable cost.
For example, that's right. That's right. Now, if we look at the breakdown of box one, so the fixed cost of the fleet, I think everything looks good. Potentially, so the one thing is there's a little bit of uncertainty around leasing rate, because when you pay, right, lease rate is basically like your monthly amount, so the monthly sort of rent, right, on the truck. But it always consists of two things. It consists of some payment for the truck itself and some implied interest rate. Sometimes it's actually explicit in the contract. But so when you say reduce leasing rate, is the person referring to that whole bundle, or are they referring only to the implied rate? In which case, we definitely need another box to say reduce the cost of the trucks themselves, whether they be leased or rented or whatever. So, for example, by getting our hands on lower quality trucks or cheaper trucks or whatever. But so that
swapping the trucks for cheaper trucks,
for example. But so all that it's a little bit vague exactly what the person means. Do they mean the whole bundle, or do they mean only the implied rate? So all that could be clarified. But otherwise, it's good. The variable cost, exactly like you said, Arsene, the bit that's missing is the maintenance cost. Whoops, sorry. Whoops. And box 3, yeah, I think it's there's potentially I think there is an overlap between streamlining processes and improving efficiency. That's definitely an overlap, right? But one way that it could be sort of solved would be to say reduce the number of processes and make the remaining processes more efficient. That would work. So, and then of course the outsourcing, it should be just clarified that it's the outsourcing of admin, right? And not the outsourcing of the whole operation. But Otherwise, yeah, otherwise it's a good breakdown. It's a good breakdown.
One more question coming to reality, like improve efficiency and streamlining the processes has a little bit of overlap. But if I know, for example, in practice, already a bit in advance, I know that I will not be focusing on this because of this or that reason. Is it okay to keep a small overlap? It will not hurt much, right?
It's okay, exactly. If you already know that you're not going to focus on that because basically, 90% of the opportunity and what people are interested in are costs that are related to the trucks. So you're only going to focus on the fixed cost of the fleet and the variable cost of the fleet, then fine. It's fine if you don't do the stuff at the bottom super clean from a pragmatic perspective, right? I think just from a perspective of kind of like always training, having high standards for your brain, I think it's good to try to avoid the overlaps, but will it impact the quality of your project? Well, no, because you're not going to be working on this bit.
Thanks.
Good. Okay. All right. Let me just share just a couple of thinking hacks. Maybe they help you with your problem structuring. Maybe they help you further down with your problem solving. They're just kind of like neat little things about solving problems. So hack number one is amplifying the problem. So basically, the idea is that like if you're kind of stuck thinking about a problem, or if you want to sort of think outside the box and not just inside the box, then make your problem 10 times as big as what it actually is. So I'll just give you an example. Let's say that like we're talking about ESMT, right? And let's say that Career Services wants to bring SEAT or Skoda, I don't know, to do a company presentation on campus. And so the company says, okay, fine, we'll come, but you've got to guarantee that at least 75 students will attend because otherwise it's not worth our while, right? It just is so much time, preparation, costs, etc. So if you can't guarantee 75 people, we don't come. So the question is, how do you get 75 students to attend the company presentation? And you might start coming up with ideas, right? About, I don't know, incentives, blah, 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 right? But now if you actually change the problem to how do you get 750 students to attend, all of a sudden you're probably going to start thinking about things that you would not have thought of before. For example, hey, do they all have to be SMT students? Probably not, right? We just had students. So now we're going to start thinking about, students from outside the SMT, and things like that. So it's by amplifying the problem, it just kind of like forces you to get out of the box of the problem. And that can give you a broader view on the problem. So that's one hack, amplify the problem. The second hack, that one is one that I use like very, very often, is when you're trying to achieve a certain outcome, so often like a how-to question, it can be really helpful to reframe the question as what would prevent the outcome, or actually it's kind of solving the opposite problem. So let me give you an example. If, for example, I say, how can I increase sales of my product? A helpful way to do this is to say, okay, let's reframe it as, why would people not buy my product? I mean, or I could even say, like, how can I get people not to buy my product? But let's say, why would people not buy my product, right? And then you just kind of come up with one potential reason. Let's say, come up with one reason. You could say, it's not useful. People don't like it, or people don't find it useful. So you say, okay, so the implication of that is that if we want people to buy our product, it has to meet the needs of the customer. So it has to have the right features. Okay. And then you say, all right, let's imagine that we do solve this and people still don't buy the product. Why not? And then you come up with another reason. Okay, maybe it's too expensive. Okay. So then you say, okay, so another thing that's important is that it needs to have the right price. Okay, let's say, what if they still don't buy the product? And then it's like, well, they don't actually know it exists. Okay, so implication is we need to promote. What if they still don't buy the product? Maybe they don't know where to find it. So we need to distribute effectively. And so the point is, by reframing the problem as like what would prevent this outcome, and then coming up with one reason, and then thinking, okay, let's imagine it's solved, and still the problem is still there. So we eliminate another blocker, and then, but the problem is still there, and so on and so forth. It gives you a very sort of methodical way, and actually kind of a messy way of identifying the underlying factors that can ultimately help you to achieve your desired outcome, which is in this case, increase the sales of the product. So I think it's a nice hack. I use it a lot, like in kind of everyday life. All right. I'm going to repeat a couple of things, a couple of suggestions that I made the last time, but so this is about being pragmatic in the way, like in your approach to structuring your problem. I think you want to be pragmatic, but at the same time, you still want so pragmatic meaning you don't want to completely reinvent the wheel. You want to use like good shortcuts. But at the same time, I also think it's good to take care of the health of your brain, right? Being in school is an opportunity to train our brains. And our brain is like the most valuable thing that we have. So getting it to work is really good. So finding the right balance. But the point is, there's a pretty high chance that whatever problem you're working on, people have worked on the same problem like many, 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 many times before. It's nothing new about your problem, right? The context, yes, but the nature of the problem, no. So I say, I think it really pays to still do your own thinking on the problem, definitely, because then you're building your brain muscles and you're getting more connected to the problem if you do your own thinking. In addition, though, I think it helps to leverage the experts, right? Prior work on your type of problem, rather than sort of doing it completely by yourself. Like take advantage of the resources that are out there, including the thinking that other people have done about this already. So my suggestion would be first, build the question tree by yourself. So that's taking care of your brain and connecting with the problem. Then ask experts. So it can be like experts, like human experts. You interview them. It's like, how would you think about this? And then, of course, it can be ChatGPT, who's kind of like the machine expert. And then, or you can ask Google. But I think now that there's ChatGPT, Google is kind of like, it's just so unwieldy. Although there's now the AI that shows up with Google, so it's starting to be a bit better, but okay. Clean up your experts' answers. So discard the outliers, make sure that it's messy because sometimes it's not. Although if you ask ChatGPT to make things messy, it'll usually do a very good job of making things messy. Sometimes it might make a mistake. And then compare your question tree with, I don't know, whatever came out of the expert's mouth, real mouth or digital mouth. And then you can refine your question tree on that basis. Yeah. So I think it's a way of kind of getting the best of both worlds. So it's like you train your brain, you create intimacy in your and connectedness with the problem, but at the same time, you take some appropriate shortcuts and you considerably decrease the chance that you go in a direction that actually doesn't make sense. What I would say though is like, don't sink into research. This is a big risk if you go into Google. If you start trying to find structure for your problem by asking Google, because Google means you're going to need to click on many links and look at whatever those websites are, and that starts to become potentially a very time-consuming activity. But again, if you use ChatGPT, the beauty of it is that like it just gives you instantaneous answers, but it kind of gives you the synthesized version of 1,000 Google links, right? So that's kind of the amazing aspect about it. So anyway, yeah, so leverage experts. And then when you're working, of course, with your sponsor, I think that's, of course, that pays a lot of dividends, right? You want them to be on board with what you're doing. You want them to provide input into what you're doing, right? So again, drive the process. So bring the question tree to them. Don't ask them, hey, how would you build it? So bring a question tree to them and get them to react on it. And when you do, first show them level 1. I really recommend first show them level 1. You might even, if you're in the same room as them, what you might even do is it's kind of like, if this is kind of ugly, but like what you might do is even like use a piece of paper to hide level 2 and level 3 so that they only see level 1. Right? Because otherwise there's the risk that they immediately go to the detail and that they start challenging you on the detail, and that's not the conversation you want to have at this point in time. Another idea is you show them 2 question trees. Like, here's one way of looking at the problem. Here's another way of looking at the problem. Does either of these resonate more with you? Right? And that can be the basis of a really, really good conversation. Of course, ask insightful questions, and then consistently like play back and summarize, right? It's just really good. It just makes every time you play back and summarize, it gives you a chance to weed out whatever you misunderstood. It triggers more thoughts in their brain, which can be useful for you. So again, the sort of checklist and red flags for phase 2. You can be confident that you're ready with phase 2 when you have a complete question tree down to level 2, 3, so a mix of level 2 and 3, that your question tree fully passes the health check, so solution focus, MECE, makes business sense, and that your key stakeholders or sponsor, right, has explicitly validated it and says, yeah, that's a great way to look at the problem. The red flags at this stage, you're buried in research. I really think research is not, especially extensive research, is not your friend at this stage. It's just moving sands. I'll share this anecdote which I shared with like a younger group a couple days ago. It's like, and forgive the sort of biblical analogy, but for me, like research at this stage is kind of like the poisoned apple from the Garden of Eden, or the snake. It's like the research pretends that it's your friend because why? Right? Because one, you feel the need to be productive, right? Of course, we all want to be productive. We feel better when we're productive, and research makes us feel productive because we're actually I'm working on my project. And the other thing is when the topic is you feel like you haven't wrapped your head around the topic, you feel a little bit sort of overwhelmed by the topic, that creates an emotional discomfort. Like I don't understand this topic. So you feel uncomfortable, right? It's an emotional thing. And the way that we respond to this emotional discomfort is by doing research, because then it helps us to somehow get more comfortable and more familiar with what is otherwise unfamiliar. So this research, it feels good because we feel productive and we become more comfortable. But you're actually not making any real progress on actually solving the problem. So it's completely deceptive. This is why I say it's kind of like it's the snake in the Garden of Eden, right? Eden, it pretends to be your friend, but actually it's not. You can see I have very strong feelings about this. Okay, another red flag. You're trying to build a question tree without a robust question or problem definition, right? So the question is mushy, it's unstable, it's vague. All this is not a good place to build a question tree on top of. Your question tree doesn't, or your tree doesn't have questions, okay? Or it has data mining questions. We talked about that a lot in this section. So next steps. Let me start with the endpoint. 6th July, so I guess in 3 weeks or so, is the deadline for your project proposal and plan. Your PDTs and the question trees, like if you get those done from a content perspective, I would say that's 90% of your project proposal. ESMT has its own sort of template and thing that you need to fill out. But if you solve the PDT and the question tree, you'll have 90% of what you need to fill in the template, the ESMT template. So refine your PDTs and question trees, get feedback from each other, from your sponsor, work with ChatGPT, right? Our next webinar will be phase 3, which can also help with your project proposal and plan. It's basically a way of narrowing down the scope of what you're going to work on. It's basically phase 3 is all about making your life easier. And it's actually quite easy to understand. So that's why it's only an hour on this one. And then on the 2nd of July, we'll have an hour of office hours. So first come, first serve. So if you want to come and ask questions, I don't know, get feedback on your project proposal or your plan, or simply want to listen, then just come. Any questions?
I do have one question about, you mentioned that it's okay to have the question trees. So that sounds like a good idea to me, because now I'm not sure if my, let's say, question should be about business KPI type of thing, like how do I set up a successful business that sells wine from this or that country, or I should really try to have a marketing-based question, like how do I make sure that people start talking about Armenian wine, which would be much more tough, and I don't have solutions to this yet. But maybe by doing this question tree, it will help me get some ideas how to do it. So and at which stage should I really commit to one?
Yeah, so hold on. So I think that there's two different things. What you're talking about is two different questions. Two different questions. So should I work on this question or that question? And I think that is a totally legitimate thing to do. And that is a discussion you should have with yourself and maybe
I think I understand now.
Yeah.
You meant two different trees for the same original question.
Exactly.
I see. Okay.
What you're talking about makes perfect sense. Like I think because two different questions, you're solving two different problems, and so each problem there's different value in solving each one, right? So it's a good discussion to have with yourself and your sponsor. It's a very good discussion. But that to me is a completely different conversation than the question around, given that I have chosen this problem, what are two different question trees that I could use to solve this problem? Just like here, actually, if I just go back to the feedback, right? This was the question, how can we increase our market share with Gen Z, right, on the Samsung products? Here we have 4 different question trees, but all for the same question. Yeah.
Okay.
Huh?
Thanks.
Good. And now I think I've just then deduced that you are Armenian. Correct?
Yes. And this is real project. The problem is that there is no, at least yet, real sponsor. So I am the sponsor. I want to found this company. I also want to do it in practice. And I come to myself as a consultancy to ask, how do I sell Armenian wine?
Great.
Now, if I ask a friend who is the other presenter of Armenian wine, he might say, yeah, let's go with marketing because he will profit from this. If I go to fellow wine producers from Armenia, they will say, oh yeah, let's do this one because that will help sell their wine. but it will be more sustainable if I do it as a business and have some business KPI in the heart of the question. And I don't know how to deal with this. So yes, probably I should prioritize the business, because if the business fails as a business, then I'm not solving any of the other problems as well. So these are the thoughts. And I have to be honest, I didn't proceed with the question and question trees yet, but yeah, I'm planning to do it like soon.
It sounds like you could be set up for a good discussion between yourself as the entrepreneur and yourself as the consultant and yourself as the wine lover. And maybe all over a bottle of wine, you can have that conversation.
Yeah, a bottle of wine would help that.
All right. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody, have a very good night. Best of luck as you continue reflecting on your projects, and I will see you at the next webinar, maybe. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. Have a nice day, folks.
Bye.